I'm excited to start in with the final section of a series that we're calling Big Questions, as we're looking through some of the mysteries of faith in the universe and puzzling our way through some of those questions as we come to understand life and God a little bit better. Before I dive in, though, I want to just say a couple words. First, I want to mention that if Northern Light Church has made an impact on your life at some point in the past or even today, one of the really easy ways that you can make that known is to like us on Facebook and be sure to follow us and participate in the things that you see pop up on your newsfeed from there. Share the events that come up, invite people along with things as they pop up. Next week, we're going to be beginning a new series on Sunday mornings that's called One Step Closer. And it's a look at the things that keep us from intimacy with God and with others. And so that's kind of where full, real life happens, is in closeness with others and with God. And we all have lots of different things that stand in the way between where we are and where we want to be. And so we're going to work our way through those for the next few weeks. And this coming Sunday is going to be about overcoming insecurity. So if that's a message for you, I encourage you to come back again next week. If that's a message for someone that's close to you, that you care about, invite them along too. It's going to be a really important time to think through the next steps of faith together. But today we're going to be talking about one of these big questions. And that question is, why is there evil in the world? So on one hand, this question is a classic gotcha question for those who want to disprove the existence of God. If God loves everybody so much and God is strong enough to stop bad things from happening, why doesn't God stop bad things from happening? And at the same time, people also find themselves asking this question all the time when they're in the face of a tragedy. And for those of us in this community, this has been a week of tragedy, both near and far. For those who were big fans of Prince, we lost him earlier this week, and you've seen how people have been coming together throughout Minnesota and the whole world to acknowledge his contribution to music throughout the last few decades. And right in our own town, not too far from where we are right now, there was a shooting, and there are some kids today who don't have parents anymore, just this past week. It's been a hard week, and this message comes in a timely manner, I think, for a lot of us who are asking questions and wondering where God is in the midst of all this. So there's one, and before we go any further, I want to just mention briefly that when you ask, how can all this bad happen? With an eye to say, well, it must mean there's no God. There's a problem there. Because the assumption is there's a way that the world ought to be. And if there was a God who had the power to make the world the way it ought to be, then why wouldn't he, right? Of course, the question itself doesn't disprove God. Here's the problem. Where do you get the idea there's a way the world ought to be? If you say that there ought to be no murder, then you're appealing to some sort of moral code that is above us. And the only place I can think of where we would get a moral that's above us is God. So without God, the question, why would God allow evil to exist, doesn't even make sense. So that's why I'm not going to talk about that today. Instead, I'm going to talk about the why. The why is there evil in the world? Why does God give us this world full of so many beautiful things, and yet destruction, and yet death, and yet so much pain and hurt? And the truth is that people have turned to God throughout history, not in spite of the evil in the world, but because of it. Because we encounter evil and darkness, and our faith strengthens us through difficult times. And so there must be some thoughtful ways to hold together our good God and the evil in this world without being inconsistent. Somehow these two things exist in the same universe, even though they seem to stand as opposites. So, today I'm going to give you 3 reasons why evil exists. Sounds like fun, right? So, first is because of us. Second, because of morality. And third, because of redemption. So because of us, because of morality, and because of redemption. So I'm just going to start at the top of my list, work my way through, and then you can have donuts, okay? So, number 1, evil exists because of us. If you've heard any Bible stories at all, even one, you've probably heard about Adam and Eve. That is so embedded in our culture, it's hard to avoid. God looks at them and catches them in the act of eating the fruit and thinks, I'm sure God was thinking, you had one rule. You had one rule. It's like when you leave your child in their bedroom and close the door and then peep back in and say, you're not going anywhere until this room is clean. And you close the door and you walk away and you do things for a length of time and you think to yourself, it's been awfully quiet. You go back in and it's dirtier. How did this happen? You had one job. Adam and Eve had one job. Just don't eat the fruit and everything's going to be great. But Adam and Eve, just like the rest of us, insisted on having their own way. We want what we want, no matter who we hurt. And now, there's a question about whether the place that we're in terms of having a broken world where evil happens, is that because of Adam and Eve, or are they just the first symptom in a chronic illness of our own brokenness and sin? Again, a question I'm not going to answer for you today. But I don't, and because I don't even know for sure. But they don't get us off the hook, even if it's their fault. We are responsible for our own actions. So why doesn't God just take control and prevent bad people from doing bad things? Right? God could step in at any moment and stop the bullet mid-flight. God could step in at any moment and intervene before tragedy strikes. Stop the car before the collision. Why doesn't God just do that? Well, if you start with the idea that God loves us, then a logical next thought is God will not control us. Because love does not control. If you've ever seen a relationship where love turns into control, there's a word for that. Abuse, right? We don't want an abusive God. We want a loving God who gives us the freedom to make our own choices and to allow the implications of those choices to take hold. So if God loves us, and we are made to love too, then it has to come from a place of freedom. And that freedom that God gives us leaves the door open on both ends, both good and evil results. So in one real way, because of God's love, we are free. And because we are free, we make bad things happen. And you don't have to look further than any newspaper you've ever picked up to see how we are the source of so much of the evil that happens. It doesn't come from outside of us. So that's my first reason why. Why there's evil in the world is because of us. My second reason why there's evil in the world is because of morality. Now this might sound a little funny at first, that our own morality is the source of evil, but hear me out here for a second. Like I said before, we have a moral code, right, that we use that comes from above us. We use it to judge between right and wrong. And that moral code comes from God. We look at the world and we insist that some of the events that we see are evil and some of them are good. And we use this moral code to judge between the two. And if we as individuals and communities didn't have this kind of moral compass, moral agency, then nothing would be good or evil, because events require a human observer to look at them and say, oh, that's terrible, we'll call that thing evil. Right? There needs to be a human participating in it to make it moral one way or the other. Think of morality like a pair of glasses, all right? So I've got mine here, all right? When you use morality, you're putting the glasses on, and it changes the way that you look at the world. You can actually see the good and the evil as they exist. And I could choose to set my glasses aside, but then I wouldn't see the world as it is. And if we take our morality off and set our morality to the side, we could choose to set morality aside, and then nothing would be good or evil. But we have to be okay with that in every circumstance if we're setting our morality aside. Even when bad things happen to us, even when evil is done to us, we have to say, that's neither good nor evil. Morality is something that we just thought of. But as it stands, most of us wear our morality glasses all the time. We generally do know the difference between good and evil. And that's another thing that goes back to Adam and Eve, because that fruit wasn't any old apple. That was fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And without that knowledge, we were content. We had our glasses off. After eating that fruit, that's putting the glasses on. And now that we see evil, we get indignant when God doesn't stop it. So, there's evil in the world, one, because of us. We create it. Two, because of our morality. It creates this construct of evil. And three, there's evil in the world because of redemption. Here's the reality about evil and suffering that we don't like to admit, especially when we're in the midst of it. It's actually not really helpful to think about it this way. But from the long view, if you think about the hardest thing you've ever endured, a loss, a tragedy, a failure, think about that for a moment, that one hardest thing. And now ask yourself, would I be the person I am today without that loss? I'll answer it for you. No. If you faced hardship head on, embraced the difficulty, and grown through that experience, then that loss doesn't stay in the negative column. It becomes a redeemed experience. If you've ever watched pretty much any movie, you know that this is true. Because that's a story arc that we as humans find true in the depths of who we are. That through difficulty and hardship, people grow and change, and that's how the story has a happy ending. Not because the bad just slips through the cracks and isn't there anymore, but the people with the internal fortitude to look at difficulty right in the face, develop something within them to become stronger and move forward. I just gave you a synopsis of every movie ever. What do you think of that? It's pretty good. There are brands of Christianity now that reject this idea that bad things happen to everybody. They say if you're righteous enough, then bad things won't happen to you, you won't get sick, you won't have problems at all. There are several problems with this way of understanding the world and Christianity. The main one is Jesus. That's the main problem with this way of understanding the world, is that Jesus went to the cross. Jesus, the most righteous, noble, kind, good person ever, still had to face a cross. So the real question, and because of that reality that our loving God came to us and suffered, the real question isn't, why is there evil? As much as we long to find an answer. The real question is, What has God done about it? And the answer to that is right there in the cross. You see, God didn't stay away far in the clouds, apart from the evil of this world, which was God's total right to stay distant and abstract. That's our idea of things that are spiritual, is they're far away and it's hard to get a hold of. Well, God became very holdable when God came to earth in the form of Jesus, in a baby as small and innocent as Esme. God entered human likeness and took that fragility and led a human life and died a human death. In fact, not just a human death, an inhumane death. The kind of death that you would never inflict on your worst enemy, let alone the God who comes to teach you how to love. And the reality is hard to fathom, but the highest and most beautiful display of love is at the cross. The ways that you see love in action with the most clarity in the world are in those moments of sacrifice. And you can't sacrifice without that pain, without the hardship, without the burden of evil. And so it's at the cross we see love at its height. So what evil are you fighting against? How are you suffering today? Wherever your pain comes from, I need you to know today, whatever pain you're facing in your life, there is a God who loves you deeply. A God who loves you so much that he shed spiritual immortality and faced the cross. And that cross did so much more than just pay for sins. That's a big deal. But that cross led to the resurrection and the creation of a community. And now, as a church, we come together and we say, we are people defined by the cross. That's why churches from the beginning have been hanging ancient symbols of torture on their walls. Not because we like the gore, not because we like the thought, but because we know God brings redemption through that story. And if God can bring redemption through the story of Jesus nailed to a cross, then God can bring redemption into your story today. And it is being told in this room right now through your life and mine. But we have to listen, we have to participate, and we have to be willing to write the next chapter with our own lives. Because God is redeeming all of our suffering. God has done something about evil. God has offered his love incomparable to anything else. Pray with me. God, we thank you so much for the opportunity to be your children. We know that you love us. And the way that you've shown that is through sacrifice. That while we were yet sinners, broken and confused, and fighting for our identity, you died for us. So help us to be people who model that sacrifice to the world, who dive in headlong to the promise that suffering can be redeemed. May our lives reflect that, and may we participate in the kind of community that will prove again and again that your love is real and your redemption is true.